Welcome back to another video. Today I will be talking about The Absolute Wonder Woman, The Last Amazon, Volume 1. I want to preface that this review rant is in fact my first, I think, formal introduction to comic books. I'm making this video just for further discussion. I just want to talk to those that really enjoy this medium, and I would like to apologize if I get any comic book jargon wrong in advance. I do have a basic understanding of Diana's original story, so the fact that this universe comes with a lot of changes was still very nice to have. I was still in on a lot of the changes that were happening. This part will be spoiler free until I say that it's not. I'll put a timestamp in when I get to the spoilers. The Last Amazon Volume 1, Kelly Thompson, the author, essentially strips Diana away from the Amazons and writes a story that really focuses on what makes Diana Wonder Woman in any type of universe that she would exist in. And I will say that this story stands out to me even compared to Absolute Superman and Batman, which I have also read. The changes to her character feel a little more drastic, especially when you think about how the character design is presented. I think that when you look at Superman and Batman, they're keeping essentially their same colorways and they seem very similar to their original counterparts. Whereas in this universe, the complete drastic change of Diana's entire wardrobe and her weapon set is not only redesigned to look really cool, but it's also very sensical, and everything that is changed about her character design, like her weapons and what she wears, are all vessels for storytelling. This is actually technically my second Wonder Woman comic volume that I've read. I've also read the New 52 Wonder Woman Volume 1, Blood, and I don't know if the comparison is like apples versus oranges, because they are different stories at the end of the day, but I will say that I really liked the pacing of The Last Amazon a lot more, and I think that this story feels a lot more memorable for me. And on the side of critique, the only thing that I can really critique is that I don't think I felt very connected to side characters very much in this volume, and I think that essentially everyone was written in a way to essentially just focus in on Diana as a character, and I think the only exception to that is her mother figure in this story. And yeah, with that being said, I would recommend anybody who hasn't already read this comic read it. I think it was very enjoyable. I really love the art and the writing for this. And yeah, I'm gonna start spoiling now. So first off, I would like to start with a character analysis for both Diana and Circe. Let's talk about Hell. And let me say that whoever pitched the Absolute Universe concept, I think, is a genius. And whoever decided to make Diana the Last Amazon is definitely pushing the boundaries on, what we imagine Wonder Woman to be. And, for myself, Diana being raised alongside her fellow Amazons was always an innate part to her character. I think a lot of her original character is built upon this idea of her rising to her role as Princess of the Amazons and using her power to protect humanity. And without the Amazons in this and her direct access to power and status, we're able to read a lot further into her own character, and we see how incredibly curious, determined, intelligent, and resourceful she is without the direct footing and the guidance of the Amazons, which leads me to Circe. And let me preface this with the fact that before the making of this video, I actually had no idea that Circe was actually more often portrayed as an antagonist in Wonder Woman's comics. Also, another side note is that I did do more reading on her for her backstories in the original comics, and I do think that she doesn't sound like the worst villain out there. I think that with her backstory of, trying to find her soul, I think that she is a pretty reasonable villain. But in this story, I think that she's a very interesting character because of how real she is, or how real she feels, and I think that she's a very grounding character in this comic book, and I think that Kelly Thompson does a great job of keeping her core characteristics. I mean, to start, she was totally going to let Diana perish when she was dropped off in Hell, right? She was totally like, why are you giving me a baby? I'm in Hell. I'm here to suffer. What is this child going to do for me? How is this gonna change? And she was totally just gonna let Diana just perish because dang, you're stuck in Hell. There's nothing you can really do to get out of that situation, right? And to be completely honest, I think she's super real for that. When you think about the motivations for her to really raise Diana, there was not any backing to that, right? So I think that her initial reaction to to her is very grounding. And when she sees that Diana is actually very capable of surviving in hell, even though she's an infant, then Circe's like, okay, well, why not, essentially. And this is maybe one of my favorite parts of the comic as far as art goes, is that when she's raising her, we get 3 pages of these really long panels that turn this empty cave, and it slowly transitions into this home. And I think that one, it was like one of the sweetest things ever. I thought it was very endearing. And then also it's that visual change of how Diana and Circe are both transforming a space together. And that leads me to this idea that the key point of the story was definitely how love is the most transformative thing that we possess. Not only does Diana transform Circe into a loving mother, but Circe transforms Diana in return to better equip herself for the battles and strife that she can foresee in her future. It's really this mother-daughter dynamic that is built upon throughout this volume that makes Diana's heroics or whatever she's doing a lot more satisfying. I think in a lot when we think about a lot of superheroes, we're just like, oh, they're like super cool, like that's just what they're supposed to do. And I think that might even be more of the case with Diana, because to start off, we see her in combat and she's just destroying these monsters left and right. It feels a little flat, I would say, to begin with, but when we are introduced to Circe and how she influences Diana, when it comes to the precipice at the end of the book, when she's going for the final blow on the Tetracide and we see her use the lasso called Sacrifice, we're given that insight into how Circe crafted the weapon and how Diana's innateness for love and compassion actually really clashes against Circe and her more realistic views. And I really think that this scene in particular makes Diana feel a lot more relatable, despite how unreal she can seem. Previously in the comic, we literally saw her cut her arm off for this man that she barely knows because she believes that she has a higher calling, right? But in this scene where she's arguing with Circe about using the lasso sacrifice, she's calling it cruel, and she's, like literally fighting with her mom, being like, why would I do this to somebody? Why would I want to use this weapon to hurt anybody? Essentially, they have their argument, or I wouldn't even really call it an argument. They have their disagreement, and then Hecate comes down, talks to Diana herself, and essentially instills into Diana that you can still very much be a loving and compassionate person. There is still nuance to why you would have to harm those around you, essentially, or do things that might seem harmful. I think that that's very real, and I think that adds a lot more nuance to her character. I would say that, side note on talking about Diana's character in general, I will say that her ripping her arm off was probably the sickest thing that I've seen recently. Like, that was so metal. I remember I was reading this comic book like while I was using the restroom, and I remember just like yelling out loud, like, what the hell? And I was just like, what is happening? I think that moment is also something that sticks to me as far as her really being willing to sacrifice anything for a higher cause. And then also on the topic of characters, like I said earlier, I don't think this novel delved out their side characters enough. I didn't feel connected to Steve very much at all, and I think that I might just be biased because I generally don't think I've cared about him anyways, if that makes sense. He's not the most intriguing character to me, and I don't think in this book or in this novel he was either. I think definitely the spotlight was on Diana and Circe and their dynamic more than anything, and I think Steve was just added alongside the other side characters to really shine a light on Diana and kind of help the plot along. And with that being said, this is also something that I think bothered me a little bit, is that when Diana uses sacrifice and she uses the lasso to turn herself into a version of Medusa, to turn the Tetracide into stone, I thought that was absolutely sick. I thought it was super cool. And I understand why we would want Steve to be the one to transform her back into Wonder Woman, because it's all about this idea of how love is the thing that is the most transformative thing that we can have. Because at the end of the day, technically, Steve also saves the city, because if he didn't do that, everybody would have been, cut off. personally, I don't think that it was the most riveting thing when he was helping her. I maybe it was like the issue with my imagination when I was reading the panel and I wasn't feeling it. I just don't think that there was enough context for his character for me to really, really care about and really acknowledge his moment of saving Diana as a precipice of like what we could do as humans. You know what I mean? Maybe it's just me being biased because I don't think he's cool. I don't know. I will say that most of this rant is definitely based off characters, talking about characters, because I do think that the plot in general was fairly simple in storytelling. I think that the plot did a great job to reintroduce Diana in this universe, and I think that her fighting the Tetracide alongside each of her flashbacks was definitely a really good mechanism to unravel her character throughout the novel. You know, instead of us reading and already assuming that she's just a badass hero, we really get to dive deep into how she became that way. I think plot-wise, my one question is that I was just really confused as to how she got to Earth in the first place to fight the Tetracide. We saw her sacrifice her arm to cast a spell that would return Steve to Earth. Like, that was the only way he could get out of hell. And it's been iterated that it's very hard to get out of a hell. Like, Circe's been there for longer than Diana was. And at the beginning of the comic book, she just kind of appears and fights all the monsters. And we don't know how she got there. I would say that's like probably the only point where I was like, yeah, I don't think that makes that much sense. But you know, they still wrapped things up in explaining how she's able to get out of the underworld and still see her mother later on. So I did appreciate that. I would say art-wise, I really liked the main art for this volume. I think right after she defeats the Tetracide and she gets pulled back into hell, I think the more realistic, I would even say it was a little raunchy-esque type of art. I don't think I liked personally as much. I think I just didn't vibe with how raunchy it felt, although it was giving like thirst trapping for Diana, which is like, we need edits of this because she is a beast in these comics. I don't think it was my personal taste. So I did enjoy it when the art kind of reverted back to how we saw it, I think in the first 6, I don't know what they're called, not volumes, 6 parts. I'll call them parts. I know I'm not using the right word. But yeah, my conclusion and overall assessment is that I really love this volume and I can't wait to read more. I know more parts have come out. I haven't read them yet. I'm kind of waiting for the volumes all to come out so I can just read them from my local library. I love Diana's character. I think that this novel does a really good job of inspiring myself, at least, to be a better person. And I think that's what all superheroes are generally meant to do, is just to inspire young people to do better, not just for themselves, but for the people around them. And I think that this definitely gets the job done. And yeah, I love her character even more. I don't know if you guys can see them fighting, but yeah, I definitely recommend this if you haven't read it already, and I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments. If you are more experienced with comic books, let me know what you guys think, and yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.